Did you know that close to 40% of projects worldwide fail due to lack of planning, resources, and activities? And only 2.5% of companies globally complete 100% of their projects. Welcome, everyone, and thank you all for joining us for today's webinar on building team efficiency and effectiveness. My name is Kaylin Saunders, and I will be your host for today's session. A brief introduction about us: Invensis Learning is a leading training and certification organization, providing globally recognized certification courses such as PMP, Prince2, Kappa, Lean Six Sigma, PMI ACP, DevOps, COBIT 5, Cloud Computing, Big Data, and more. Over 10,000 professionals worldwide have been trained and certified by Invensis Learning for some of the leading Fortune 1000 companies and government organizations across 40-plus countries since 2015. Invensis Learning also hosts webinars on some very interesting topics across various industry verticals. So follow us on LinkedIn and other social media platforms to stay regularly updated on our upcoming webinars. Today's webinar will be presented by Teresa Lawrence, a project management expert with over 20 years of experience, also known as the Breakthrough PM. She previously worked as a superintendent of schools and is now the current president of International Deliverables, LLC. Teresa provides training, facilitation, and coaching in creativity and the application of creative problem solving in all aspects of project management across all industries, organizations, and companies. Additionally, she provides professional services in the management of strategic initiatives, innovation and change, as well as a provider of PDUs and PMI certification training. Teresa is alum of the International Center for Studies in Creativity, ICSC, and serves as the VP for certification training in the Buffalo PMI chapter. She's the past recipient of Buffalo Business First, Women of Influence, and the University at Buffalo Graduate School of Education's Distinguished Alumni Award. So just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the Q&A panel, which is on the right side of the screen, and I will bring them up at the end of the presentation. Also, there will be poll questions during the session, so kindly participate to make the session much more interactive. Now, without further ado, I will hand it over to Teresa to take this webinar session forward.
Hello, everyone. It's Teresa here. I'm happy to spend the next 90 minutes with you looking at this notion of creative problem solving, divergent and convergent thinking, and as it relates to impacting the effectiveness and efficiency of your teams, as well as providing feedback to your team members. Just a little bit about me. I am a graduate of the International Center for Study in Creativities. I have the distinct honor of being a second generation directly down the lineage of Alex Osborne and Sidney Parnes, the creators of Brainstorming. So we have one poll that we'll use just to start with right away. When I do my trainings with project managers, upper level managers, those looking to make decisions and problem solve, what we find often is that people are familiar with some strategies, yet the question is, have you ever had any formal training in creative problem solving?
So you can go ahead and answer. The poll should have shown up on your screens, so you can pick yes or no.
Again, the question would be, have you ever had any formal training? Meaning, have you just picked it up on your own tools and techniques, or have you had some formal training? And then Caitlin, if you can just kind of give me the split of that, that would be great.
Definitely. So it looks like everybody's answers are still almost in. We've got a larger percentage of no, but we do have 33% saying yes.
Oh, great. That'll be exciting. It'll be interesting to see how we can use their knowledge throughout the webinar. So we'll move along. What we're going to do today in the next 90 minutes is ensure that you have a deep understanding of the ground rules of divergent and convergent thinking, things that we specifically want to be mindful of and work with as we make our way through creative problem solving. We're going to use tools. I'll teach you about 7 tools today, some of which we'll be looking at finding possibilities, coming up with ideas, and then we'll also use some tools to apply them to evaluating ideas, to developing them further. And then lastly, I'll make sure that you know what HT, HM, WMBAT, and IWWM stand for and when they would best be utilized. So here we go. Creative problem solving and the creative problem solving process. It's important just to give you a little bit of context before we jump right in. So what we know is that project managers are faced with the task of finding solutions to complex and ambiguous challenges. The goal is to try to find solutions, many solutions, from which we can choose a few to develop and then decide to implement. The good news is that solutions can easily be stumbled upon. Everybody can be trained to be creative. It can be taught, and we can be creative on demand. The thing that we know about creativity is that it's been defined as novelty that's useful. Not just a solution for the solution's sake or novel for novel's sake, but it must meet some purpose. The beauty of creativity is that here we'll intersect it with components of project management. So we'll have novelty that's useful as we deliver something in a time-bound fashion. We're going to use the thinking tools from creative and problem solving so that we can, again, be deliberately creative in finding solutions. Again, our main goal is to have many solutions from which to choose, increase the capacity and the efficiency of our team members, and more importantly, increase the efficiency of our processes throughout projects. So just a little context for you. Creative problem solving, it's a comprehensive thinking framework built for developing creative solutions to problems. We toggle between divergent and convergent thinking throughout each of these stages, and we'll talk a little bit more about those throughout the webinar. On the screen, upper left-hand side, you can see our first thing that we're going to do in creative problem solving is make sure that we assess the situation. There, we would be using the cognitive thinking skill of diagnostic thinking. And that is to make sure we have a clear understanding of exactly what the problem is that we're facing. In there, we would use divergent and convergent thinking. Next, we would move to exploring the vision. There we would be using visionary thinking. And we'd want to articulate a very vivid image of what it is we'd like to create or solve. Next, formulating challenges. There we need to use strategic thinking. We'll need to identify the critical issues that must be addressed and start to develop pathways needed to move forward. Again, in each one of these phases of creative problem solving, or in any of these cognitive thinking tools, we would consistently be moving between divergent and convergent thinking. Once we've explored our vision, formulated our challenge, we'll move on to exploring ideas and invest in ideational thinking. There we'll be producing original mental images and thoughts that help propel us forward. With those ideas, we'll formulate a solution and use some evaluative thinking. And we'll assess the reasonableness and the quality of the ideas to determine which ones we want to use. Two other stages belong in the creative problem solving. One is exploring acceptance, and there we need to have some contextual thinking. We need to understand the interrelated conditions and circumstances that will either hinder or support the implementation of our idea. Lastly, we would formulate a plan and use tactical thinking. There we would devise a plan that has specific and measurable results in order to implement and assess our situation. In any one of these phases in creative problem solving, we rely heavily on the dynamic balance between convergent and divergent thinking to generate possibilities, and convergent thinking as a means of evaluating them. So let's start there. We know that there are two types of thinking. One is divergent thinking, the other convergent. Convergent thinking is used to generate ideas. There I want you to think of the writer's mind. Use your imagination, freewheeling. How might we come up with? What are all the possibilities? So very open-minded and creative. This follow-up to that is convergent thinking, where then we judge options, we focus, and we make decisions. Here I would want you to shift your thinking to an editor, a weeder, where we will be refining and focusing. The thing with divergent thinking and convergent thinking is that there has to be a balance. We can never just do one without the other if we are intending to come up with a solution that is novel and useful. What we don't want to do is jump on the first idea and run with it. So we will consistently toggle between divergent thinking, and convergent thinking. We call that a dynamic balance between the two.
Teresa, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm just going to pop in here for a second and let you know it seems that some of the participants are having a hard time seeing the PowerPoint slides, and you have some beautiful diagrams there. If you wouldn't mind maybe describing them for now, and I'll let you know when we have the problem resolved.
Thank you. Thank you. So what we have on our screen just here is, if you think of a seesaw, so we want that balance up and down with divergent thinking and up and down with convergent thinking. The only way to come up with solutions that are novel and useful are to fluctuate between those two. So let's explore divergent thinking first, and then I'll share a handful of tools. Divergent thinking is a process of generating multiple ideas or solutions or possibilities. And in this process, we allow individuals or groups to become deliberately creative, not stopping at their first idea, but rather opening themselves up to breakthrough thinking, thoughts and ideas that we haven't considered. So that divergent thinking, it's a broad search for many diverse and novel alternatives. What we know is that 4 characteristics are present in individuals that emerge themselves in divergent thinking. Fluency, they're able to come up with lots of ideas. Flexibility, they're not necessarily stuck to that idea, they're open to developing it further. Elaboration, maybe not the first idea, but if we extended it, what might happen? And that 4th trait is originality. We know that people that are able to make connections and solve problems can see things differently and lend themselves to be open to possibilities. So first, let's explore the ground rules for divergent thinking. And I should note that whenever you use a tool, whether a convergent or a divergent tool, you would always want to remind your team and your audience of exactly what those ground rules are. Some of these might seem familiar for brainstorming if you've ever done that, and I'll certainly iterate brainstorming in just a second. But what we know about divergent thinking is that ideas are not actions. They're simply ideas. So our first ground rule is deferring judgment. Here we want to increase our respect for individuals. We want to validate team members. We want to be open to new ideas, and we're not going to evaluate them. That will come later. So deferred judgment, really anything goes. Secondly, we want to strive for quantity. We know that the only way to come up with a good idea is to come up with many ideas. Research shows us that the best, most novel ideas typically come within the last third of all of the ideas that we've generated. So strive for quantity. We want many ideas. Thirdly, we want to build on ideas. We might also call this piggybacking or making connections. There, we want to see an idea, hear an idea, and maybe extend upon it or make an extension about it. And then lastly, we want to seek novelty. We know that it's much easier to tame a wild idea than to build up an idea with very little substance. Again, here we're fostering playfulness. We're looking outside of the box. We're looking to create breakthrough thinking. So again, when we're generating ideas, these are our ground rules for divergent thinking. I always like to do a lot with cartoons to try to make a point. On the left-hand side, we know that the worst case scenario for somebody to be in is to have only one idea to work with. And so here we've got that little fish in the fishbowl. The pressure of staying fascinating is killing me. Again, it's very difficult to build up a pretty bland idea. On the right-hand side, couple guys are sitting around the table saying, I'd like to piggyback on what Polly said about dumping the body in the Jersey Shore. So again, cute little cartoons just to stress those points. So let's go ahead and look at a tool that puts divergent thinking into place. It is perhaps the most well-known divergent tool. What I find in my training and what we find in research is that it's a misnomer that brainstorming is simply coming up with a list. Coming up with a list is coming up with a list. Brainstorming is looking at generating alternatives and possibilities in solutions. So typically it's facilitator led. You could, as a team member, as a project team member, facilitate this. However, when you facilitate, you do not participate. And as a team, we would lose your ideas. So it's facilitator led. We can be co-located or not. Typically, it is in a co-located environment using Post-its and markers. But I've also done this work with Google Docs, allowing people to share their ideas right on time. So individuals huddled together have 3x5 Post-its, a fat tip marker, and when they're given a prompt, they simply give their ideas out. No thinking about them, no criticizing them, just simply stating them. You want one idea per Post-it, and you want to suspend discussion for later. The tool itself is called Brainstorming, and it extends to write it, say it, and hand it forward. So imagine I give you a prompt. You would write down your idea, say it out loud for everyone to hear, and then hand it forward to an individual so they can post it either on the wall or on the chart. That allows other people to see what you've said and think about how they'd want to extend it further. Now, the thing about brainstorming and all of these techniques is that you want to use a warm-up. You always want your team members to be taught the skill, to set playfulness, to set direction and tone before it's used. So we'll try that here. True story. We travel pretty extensively. And the first time my husband went to France, he was just fascinated with a bidet. He thought it was genius that it was in the room. He thought it was even more fascinating that there was a television and there was a phone in our room in France. And so thinking about the ground rules for divergent thinking, go for quantity, defer judgment, piggyback and make connections, and go for novelty, we're going to take about 30 seconds and see from the group what might be all the ideas you have to improve a toilet. So in your chat, if you just want to jot down your ideas, defer judgment, come up with quantity, piggyback on ideas, in your opinion, what might be all the ways to improve a toilet? And Caitlin,
Teresa, I'll go ahead and read them out as I see them come through.
Just a couple is to hear some funny things.
Heated seat.
Good, keep them coming.
Self-cleaning.
Very good.
Electronic flushing.
Keep the ideas coming. What might be all the ways to improve a toilet?
Just letting you know, Teresa, as they're still thinking about that. They are still having a hard time seeing the PowerPoint, so thank you for reading out those diagrams. And Zach did just provide a new link that hopefully participants, if you're able to click on that and see if that will load for you better, hopefully we'll be able to get the slides working for you here soon.
So when we find that we are stuck a bit with ideas, I ask you to look at this picture. And when you look at this picture, what ideas do you get for improving a toilet? Caitlin, do we have any more ideas coming in?
Not yet. We have a quiet group today. Feel free to type those thoughts in the chat box.
When you look at this picture, what ideas do you get for improving a toilet?
Making it bigger.
Making it bigger. Come on, I know we have ideas out there.
I wonder if right about now folks are logging into the new link, so it could be why there's extra bit of quiet.
Should we wait a moment?
Potentially. And in case people didn't see in the chat box, Zach did say if you are having issues with the PowerPoint, seeing this, please use that link to the right. But please also use that chat box to note ideas you have about improving a toilet, given the very unique picture in front of us.
When you look at this picture, what additional ideas do you get for improving a toilet? That task is called forced connections. So we did brainstorming. Say it, write it, and pass it forward. And then we moved to include a tool called forced connections. And with forced connections, you take a completely unrelated image or prop that has nothing to do with what you're currently working on. And we use that to help stimulate ideas, to further stimulate ideas when the group is slowing down, when they seem to be stuck, when there seems to be some lag. And again, the goal is to stimulate thinking, stimulate idea generation, knowing that the most novel ideas typically come in the last third of our ideas. When we look at pictures, we want to include things of machinery, food, nothing gory, nothing that's brand specific, but again, just to stimulate the mind. Food, people, scenery, things of that nature. And the only question that you ask of your group is, when you look at this picture, what ideas do you get for whatever it is, the prompt that we're looking to solve? So we've spoken about divergent thinking. We looked at brainstorming and forced connections so far. So Caitlin, we have a second poll question.
Yes, we do. Poll question 2, it should be showing up on your screens now for those of you who are hopefully able to see it. The question is, do you see value in using forced connections to generate additional ideas? First answer option is yes, indeed. Second is no, straight up brainstorming would generate enough ideas with my team. So far, we already have a couple folks who have responded, all yeses. Let's see if any more come through or any no's. Teresa, it looks like we have all yeses.
Oh, great. That makes me happy. So again, forced connections, pictures of unrelated items, no words, food, machinery, scenery, people. And we ask the question, what ideas do you get? Again, when we're stuck and we want to move forward. So 2 more cartoons for there. Your sparkling water, sir, and light beer. Again, what ideas do we get and what connections can we make? I always like to show some examples of where we've used brainstorming in action. On the left-hand side, doing some project management work with FEMA, which is an emergency agency that operates in the United States. Our challenge there was, how might we get pumps up and running quicker than we currently do? And so we utilized very traditional brainstorming, and that is, as a facilitator, we heard the answers and we jotted them up. On the right-hand side, a very common look of a brainstorming session. You can see all those yellow Post-its. And in the middle, we began to use another technique called SWOT, Strengths, Weaknesses, Opportunities, and Challenges, to be able to use those ideas and place them in part. All right, another tool I want to share with you is called Brainwriting. Brainwriting even expands further the idea generation that we can do. Brainwriting is a tool that helps deal with teams if there are quiet members there, if there's a power struggle there, if you might have a CEO or a senior manager there and team members. It also allows us to generate more ideas than brainstorming because everybody is working at the same time, giving their ideas. So again, it's a divergent tool, still generating ideas. The ground rules still apply, and we're all working concurrently. That little cartoon that's on there is that we, again, always need to be reminded, ideas, generating ideas is in and of itself an action. We're not looking to develop them. We're simply looking to generate them. So here's what a brainwriting template typically looks like. Research shows that we don't want any more than 3 rows across, but we can have as many columns as we want. We would state our problem statement at the top. That might read, what might be all the improvements we can make for a toilet? And then everybody has these sheets of paper and writes the first row, 3 ideas, 1 idea per box. Once you've written 3 ideas, you hand that sheet off to somebody else and either grab theirs or grab another sheet of paper where you would begin another row. Those ideas might include something that's brand new of an idea. You might read other ideas and build upon those. You might connect 2 ideas. And you can imagine if everybody is working at the same time, just think how many more ideas that we would be able to generate. Here are some examples of brainwriting in action. On the left-hand side, I was working with a strategic team that deals with homelessness in a city, and we were able to ask that question simultaneously, how might they go about better understanding the homelessness and statistics and environment in that city? So on the right-hand side, you can see those brainwriting papers with all those little sticky notes. And then we were able to categorize them. I'll show you that tool in just a little bit later to be able to hit, cluster, and restate. But again, everybody was able to get ideas down, read the ideas of others, and then extend upon them or add new ideas. We could also use force connections here. If we had individuals working, it seemed if it slowed down, again, we would put up an unrelated picture or even look around the room and point to an object and say, what ideas do you get when you look at this picture? On the right-hand side, that's an example of working with a project management team that was looking to hire a new team member. And what we asked was, what could a candidate or a team member show that would put their skill set on display during an interview? And so people were able to jot down their ideas, give that back to the interviewing team, and they could collect from among all of those ideas, some ideas that allowed the interview to be a little bit more interactive. So Caitlin, I'll just take a quick second. Maybe I can ask the group, does anybody see how this might be of benefit to them, whereby brainwriting could help their team generate more ideas and or kind of level the playing field of their team members?
Feel free to type those answers or responses into the chat box, and I can read them out to Teresa and to the rest of the group.
Great.
I'll go ahead and add for me, the answer would be yes. I'm sure my team could benefit from it.
And tell me a little bit more, Caitlin, why do you say that?
I think you mentioned about the dynamics with some people being more outspoken than others and it giving everybody the opportunity to have their voice heard.
And what's nice about that is that, again, if they're on sticky notes and you're going to use them later on, it's not really so much about the originator of the idea, but simply the fact that we want ideas and we need ideas. So we looked at divergent thinking, we looked at brainstorming, write it, say it, stick it up. We looked at force connections, and we looked at brainwriting. So divergent thinking, and then 3 tools to be able to apply that and use it. The thing about divergent thinking is that we just don't limit ourselves to generating ideas. Sometimes we use divergent thinking to clarify a situation. And here, what we want to be able to do is change our framework to a challenge into an opportunity. We know that language is so very powerful. And the thing about creative problem solving is that we constantly want to reside in the space of being able to problem solve. And so we'd want to shift our thinking from, say, something, I can't afford something, to how might I afford something. So again, we want to also use divergent thinking to help clarify. And here we're going to use statement starters to do that. How to, how might, in what ways, what might be all the ways. And if you take a second just to think about that, already just framing a challenge in that way, we immediately begin to solution. We immediately begin to come up with ideas. So let's look a little bit more at diverging to clarify. Oh, but wait, first a little cartoon. So where I live, we have a handful of wind turbines and they're receiving a little bit of pushback. So the question would be, knowing that they're there, what might be all the other uses for wind turbines? And the woman looks at her husband and says, can you swim out there and charge my cell phone? So again, we want to take a challenge and turn it into an opportunity. True story, when I was working as a superintendent of schools, we were going to put in a turf field. And what we experienced was that neighbors were a bit agitated by it, because not so much that they would have access to a turf field, more so the lights. They had great concern that the lights would be shining constantly down onto their homes. And so at a meeting, it became quite contentious and really started to focus on, we want this or we don't want this. And what we were able to do is really get to the heart of the challenge and see how we might problem solve. And so we talked a little bit about the ground rules for brainstorming. And then we began a discussion about really restating what some challenges might be. And so, how might we use the lights for safety? How might we charge computers? In what ways could we use solar panels over electricity? How might we make the lights retractable? And what might be all the ways to cover the light bulbs as they burn down? Or how to make the lights more aesthetically pleasing? What we were able to do is take that fourth bullet, how to make lights retractable, and ask the project team, the construction team with whom we were working, what does it mean? Is it possible to be able to make a retractable light such that by day or by game time it's up high, but could it come down lower to street level and provide some level of safety and security and lighting in the community? Toward the end of this webinar, we're going to talk about a tool called Point. And we're going to see at face value what's interesting of an idea, but if developed. And so what might it mean to have a retractable light from a field light? Would that save on energy from safety systems? Would we no longer need street lights? So again, the point was we had a challenge in front of us and we restated that challenge to really clarify what might we do in that situation. And then again, immediately it allows us to jump into a positive mindset and go about into divergent thinking. So just a little bit about statement starters. It's a set of phrases that are used to begin the statement of an idea or challenges, and we use them to trigger the brain to go to a more positive mindset. Creative problem solving, it so much relies on word power to encourage affirmative judgment and to frame challenges more promising and in a more positive light than shutting them down immediately. So if we can restate a challenge in a positive forward-thinking way, it encourages generation of ideas and triggers divergent thinking. So we'd always have a statement starter, plus a noun, plus a verb, plus an object. So rather than my son saying, as he recently did, he wanted to buy something and it simply cost too much, we could ask the question, how might we secure funding from other sources? Or how might we make this less expensive? My son wanted a TV for his college room, and that's exactly what he said, is that this costs too much. And in asking that question, how might we find ways to fund his desire to have a TV? We came up with lots of ideas, one of which was his birthday was coming up. And rather than receiving gifts from friends and family, he let it be known that he was keen to purchase a TV. And if they were going to buy him something, would they consider simply making that monetary donation? So rather than shutting down, cost too much, you couldn't afford it. Again, we asked the question, how might we find funding sources? He was able to think a little bit through together. We brainstormed, came up with a solution, and don't you know, his birthday is tomorrow and money has come in. So framing it, triggering the mind, and coming up with solutions. They're called statement starters. Most common statement starters, how to, how might, what might be all the ways, what might be all the ideas to go about solving something. What I encourage you to think about, even if it's a daily scrum meeting, if you are faced with a conflict, if it's in your own home environment, the question again is, how do we phrase that puts it in a positive light, that allows us to come up with ideas and possibilities? All things about divergent thinking. So let's just recap what we've done in this first time together. We looked at the ground rules for divergent thinking: defer judgment, go for quantity, seek novelty, and make connections. We looked at brainstorming specifically: write it, say it, pass it forward, force connections, taking unrelated pictures to extend the ideas. And we looked at brainwriting, having everybody jot down their ideas concurrently. We looked at diversion to either generate ideas, think about that, what might be all the ways to improve a toilet, and to clarify, rather than shutting down an idea, developing thought processes that let us come up with solutions. And then lastly, we looked at statement starters. So that's that first session that was looking at divergent thinking. I see that we do have a hand raised here. Caitlin, do we want to take an opportunity for a question or two if there are any?
Teresa, I think you're good to keep going.
Okay. Our next section working with our team is going to be on converging. So at this point, we would have generated ideas. We would have thought about now moving to some opportunity to select ideas and not be a buzzkill, not shut down the individual, but rather using affirmative judgment to accept ideas and then go about building them. Think about it with your teams, with your teammates. It makes no sense. It's not productive to immediately shut down somebody, immediately shut down their ideas. That being said, we do need to provide some feedback and start to make some selections. So let's look at this notion of convergent thinking. Convergent thinking, right? Kind of the opposite of divergent thinking. It's that delicate task of judging and making a decision, starting to narrow down what we want to do. What this allows us to do is develop what might be looking like some outside crazy ideas or underdeveloped ideas that if we shot them down right away, we might be closing ourselves down to a really good solution. So we're going to start to hone in of judging, assessing, narrowing ideas, but throughout, it's focused on affirmative evaluation of alternatives. So we'll ask a little poll question there again. Probably you might have been familiar with ground rules for divergent thinking, but were you familiar with ground rules for convergent thinking?
I have opened up that poll, Teresa, so we can see what people say. So I'll go ahead and repeat the question. Were you aware there were ground rules for convergent thinking? You can answer yes or no on your screens. So far, we have only no's coming in, but let's give them a little more time to see if anybody had heard of those before. Teresa, it looks like we have only no's.
Only no's. Well, that good news is that you'll walk away with some additional new learning. The ground rules for convergent thinking, there are again 4 of them. And the goal again in convergent thinking is to arrive at a shortened list of alternatives that stand head and shoulders above the others. What we want to be mindful of is shifting our thinking away from what we don't want and really assess and provide feedback and look for what it is that we do want. So 4 ground rules for convergent thinking. The first one is we want to apply affirmative judgment. We want to eliminate the early close. We don't want to shut down ideas right away. We want to have critical feedback and critical thinking. We want to have effective critical thinking rather than shutting things down. Some ideas we're simply not going to use, and that's okay. Throughout a problem-solving process, those ideas that don't solve the problem simply fall by the wayside. So we're going to apply affirmative judgment. And if you think about it, when was the last time that you gave an idea to a colleague and they either didn't say, that's a good idea, we can do that, or we've always done things like that, that doesn't solve the problem? How you feel as a teammate is quite shut down. And again, we've spoken about that. There's no need to shut down an idea or a colleague. So we'll apply affirmative judgment. We're going to be open to novelty. We're going to be open to the unexpected. We're going to encourage openness to ideas. We're going to encourage understanding of ideas. And think about how powerful that would be for your team, that you are modeling and using tools and techniques that say, I value your ideas. We're open to solutions. You want to be deliberate. Number 3, you need to consider what is realistic and is useful. So again, we talked about we talked about creativity being novel and useful. It has to meet an objective. So we need to be deliberate. Is this wild and crazy idea solving our problem? So we want to be open to novelty and we need to be realistic. And then thirdly, we need to stay on course. We need to give the ideas time to be developed. We know from research, right? We spend typically 80% of our time doing something with 20% of the outcomes. In this case, typically we spend 80% of our time generating ideas, talking about ideas, and then we quickly choose the first one, or we don't develop other ones. And so we need to think about in our teams, in our meetings, can we shift minimally to 50-50? or whatever it is, equal amounts of time, deliberate to generate, and then to assess. So again, apply affirmative judgment. We want to carefully consider the strengths of an idea. We want to be open to novelty, to entertain highly original options that we otherwise would either eliminate or, had we not used divergent thinking, mightn't have come up with at all. We want to be deliberate. It needs to be a realistic solution, and we need to stay on course. We need to give ideas time to develop. So another cute little cartoon right there. So it's a war within a small little town, and you've got somebody in the background that's made this heavily loaded gun. Obviously a great difference in time there. And it says, tell him we haven't got time for his bright ideas. We've got a battle on our hands. Had we thought about shutting down ideas early, if we weren't open to them, we might not have developed them. So divergent thinking to generate, convergent thinking to evaluate, to hone in, and to select. So let's spend a couple of minutes on a couple of tools that let us do that. Again, a very common tool, favorite tool of mine, is called highlighting. It involves 3 steps: hitting, clustering, and restating. It lets us narrow from many ideas to get a few good options. So hits, from among as many ideas as we have, we choose ideas that seem promising, that seem to have potential, that are a little bit sparkly. Once we have those, we're going to start to organize them to be related. Think of affinity associations, like things will come together. And then thirdly, we would restate them. Really, what is going on within this cluster? How might we solve that? So there's a little cartoon right there for your giggle effect. So let's explore those stages a little bit further. Hits, again, straightforward tool that uses an intuitive approach to identify those ideas that are resonating from a much larger set. We're looking for things that are workable, that are relevant, that are sparkly, that feel right, that solves the challenge, goes in the right direction. Remember, throughout, we'd be using our convergent rules. Be affirmative, be open to novelty, be deliberate, be realistic, and stay the course. Can we actually develop some of these ideas? Then we're going to scan all of these ideas that have been generated and hit using a sticky, using a marker, somehow indicating those, again, that are interesting, intriguing, promising, or on the mark. And what you see there, I worked with an organization that were looking to improve upon some student-related initiatives. Everybody gets a handful of dots. You do want to be mindful of how many dots you have. We don't want to stick every idea. And we need to remind people it doesn't matter how many ideas how many dots an idea might receive. Everybody individually is asked to go about and hit those ideas that resonate with them. If you think about it, had we had that list of all the improvements to a toilet, if we were in fact making improvements to a toilet, we would have hit those things that were fancy to us, that were interesting to us, and then we would move to another part of this process, and that's to cluster. We're going to examine only those hits that seem similar, have something in common, or could productively be grouped together. It is okay to allow ideas to stand alone. Some things might not be grouped together. We might come back to it later. We might not come back to it later. If you think about a construction project or working with stakeholders across a project, we might have lots of ideas. Who are all of our stakeholders that we need to include? What might be all of the risks we could face? How might we turn this, what appears as a negative risk, how might we capitalize on that opportunity? If we were to generate lots of ideas and then get a group to hone in on those which really warrant our attention, we could begin to refine our work. So here, for example, is work that I've done with a university faculty. And what we wanted to do is we first brainstormed all of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that were facing them as a department. They were beginning to have dwindling enrollment. So 4 different brainstorming activities, 4 different hitting activities, and then we began to find those that the group felt were strong indicators and examples of their strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And I'll use that in just a second to see how we frame that to move their work forward. So hits, clustering, and then we move to restating. What can often happen with restating is that we move to a much higher level of abstraction or broader view of really what we initially thought the challenge was. So for each cluster, we then try to synthesize and pull together everything that's taking place there into one statement. So it captures the essence of what is going on there. The goal there is to bring that cluster to life, to really capture what is taking place there. We want to restate that either in a form of a challenge statement, which we've already discussed, how to, how might, in what ways, or in an action step. In an action step, what I see ourselves doing is, and that would allow individuals or teams to immediately jump into what would come next. So again, we've ideated. We would have started to select by hitting. We would have clustered ideas together, and then we would have grouped them together under a larger statement. Two examples of how we've done that. On the left-hand side, the challenge was what might be all the features of an ideal robotics workstation. On the left-hand side, you can see we had all of those little yellow stickies. And then in the foreground, you can see that we clustered, and that groups then restated what those clusters were. And now we go back using that dynamic balance to divergent thinking to begin brainstorming or thinking about how might we go about solving that problem. And so some of the things that we have there could either divide the teams up to go work concurrently on solving issues, or the group could select that which they wanted to focus on. And I'll show you an example of that from a strategic plan a little bit later. On the right-hand side is another example of how we use this. We ideated, we grouped around our strengths and our weaknesses, and then we used those to create challenge statements, how we might use our strengths to leverage opportunities, right? Starter statements, how might we use, and then fill in the blank of a statement to leverage whatever that opportunity was. Or how might we use our strength? How to, in what ways, what might be all the ways to use a strength or an opportunity to handle a threat or a weakness. What often comes of that is then those can easily become overarching, strategically vetted focus areas for teams, for groups, for companies. Another way, just showing you how that was kind of written up. So 3 different columns. The very first one on the left-hand side are all of the ideas that a strategic board came up with, how to understand something. Imagine that middle column is where they would have hit those ideas, grouped them together, and you can see that they've been circled and restated. So they have 6 ideas there. Again, in terms of a strategic plan, in terms of team building, in terms of really giving that team things to work on that increases their efficiency. They're not working on random things. They're working on specific vetted things forward. Again, we used brainwriting, brainstorming, hit and clustered. We were able to restate. And now they have problem statements, challenge statements that, again, they could jump into divergent thinking and help solve. So convergent ground rules. We looked at hitting, clustering, restating. We're going to move into another technique that we can use to evaluate ideas. And here I want you to think about giving feedback to team members. So praise is the name of the technique. Sometimes it's also called pluses, potentials, and concerns. It's a 4-step technique that we use to evaluate and improve an idea. It's rooted in affirmative judgment, and at first lets us acknowledge what we like about the idea. At face value, what can I look for the things that I'm desiring? And in essence, ignore the things that's not there from what I'm looking for. And we do this, again, without crushing the idea and its potential or the originator of the idea. So let's look at this technique. 4-step process. Pluses. First, we would find value in the idea. We express what we like about it. Secondly, what might come if developed? What could be an unintended outcome? Or if we pushed it a little bit further, is there something else it could lead? Issues, here's where we're able to give our concerns, but we're able to take those concerns and put them in a challenge statement. And we already know what happens when you're in a challenge statement. The brain goes to work in generating ideas, and that bumps us right into new thinking. How do we then brainstorm ways to overcome stated challenges? So before we go to an example, I want you just to think about, if you are a team member, if you're a senior member of your team or of your organization, think about how you could give feedback to an employee. At face value, what do you like about their performance? What are they contributing? And opportunities. If you continue to do work like that, what might an outcome be? And then if there is an issue, timeliness, not filling out reports, whatever the case may be, rather than saying you don't get your paperwork in on time, what if we said, what might be all the ways or all of the measures you could put in place to ensure that your work is built in on time? Immediately, employees go to divergent thinking. And the beauty of that is that they will probably generate their own ideas of how they could write course themselves. So an effective and very efficient way to give evaluations and to give feedback. So let's look at a concrete example, another one of this in action. It's not too long ago that my doctor didn't provide or didn't access technology when I was in an appointment with her. And so the question would be, here's this brand new idea. What if doctors and hospitals use computerized medical records? So that's the idea, and we're going to make our way through using this tool called Point to see how we might develop that and overcome challenges we might experience. So Point, pluses. On a sheet of paper or standing up out loud, we would simply list as many pluses as we can about the idea at face value, right here, right now. What do we like about the idea or the concept, the performance of somebody? Be direct and honest and capture that list. So let's look at our examples of doctors and hospitals use computerized medical records. What's good or positive? What do we like about the idea? And here are some things that we might generate. You can access anyone's records regardless of location. No need for gobs of paperwork. Scripts can be more easily read. If you're traveling, and I've done this, maybe you have, if you're in different states, you can still log on to Walgreens and have a script filled. And doctors will process their entries into records rather than writing them, which means we could easily have some errors and mistakes. So at face value, what do we like? The pluses. Then opportunities. List all of the things that could happen or that remotely could happen if developed further. What are possibilities for further growth and development? So looking at our line of doctors and hospitals use computerized medical records, what might happen? What if the idea was further developed? What might be other outcomes? It might reduce medical errors. It might make it easier to get a second opinion. It might make it possible for patients to access their own records. So again, at face value, and then if developed, what could come of it? Point, where we're going to look at our issues, but again, we're not looking to shut down. We're looking to develop. So here we're going to express our concerns as open-ended questions that offer some glimmer of hope and possibility, and we're going to use those statement starters that we talked about in divergent thinking. So here, again, our challenge, doctors and hospitals use computerized medical records. And issues, what are the shortcomings, weaknesses, or limitations? But we're going to state those as challenge statements. So rather than we're nervous about privacy, everybody's records could be put to be in danger, how do we ensure privacy of records? How might we afford the initial cost of technology? gosh, how will we train all of the medical personnel to use these systems? I'm currently helping a company roll out a brand new IT program, and it was shared very matter of fact up front that there are some individuals, senior members of teams, that are not keen to this new way of doing business. And so the question is, how might we train in such a way that resonates with them? How might we go about seeing what they are perceiving as inhibitors, and that way then we can ideate around them? So how would we train the medical personnel? And what might be done to help doctors form new habits, shifting from paper records to digital records? Again, my example, how might we go about shifting their mindset to being more open? So we had our pluses, we had our potentials, we have our issues, and now we need to think of new thinking. Again, that dynamic balance between divergent and convergent thinking. We were able to converge, and now with those ideas, we want to generate solutions. So we review the list of issues. I'll go back one page. We would review among these issues, pick the top one that was most pressing, and we'd start to list a dozen ways to overcome it. And we will repeat that for the remaining issues. Again, if you think in terms of providing feedback to a teammate or providing an evaluation, to ask the question, what are the biggest inhibitors? More importantly, to brainstorm around ways that we could address the concerns. So we're going to go back to our idea of doctors and hospitals use computerized medical records. We're going to go to new thinking, generating ideas to overcome those concerns. And that first concern was how to ensure privacy of records. And again, very quickly, go through the ground rules of brainstorming. You can have Post-its. We could just be standing. It could be a standing meeting, and we're going to generate ideas. Limit access to the system. Have a special password. Remind people that there's no difference than protecting paper files. Hire experts. Change the passwords. Put a system of checks and balances in place. So the goal here with this tool is to accept an idea at face value, think of its potential, develop it further. And now what we won't talk about are multiple tools that we could use to select an idea. But again, we're going to use affirmative judgment and give every idea or every clustered group that was restated the opportunity to grow and to be developed to its fullest potential before deciding which idea we want and which idea we're going to implement. So here's an example. When I went into a company to do the trainer, instead of improvements to a bathtub, we looked at improvements to a toilet. We looked at improvements to a bathtub. And what they talked about is making it softer. So one of the pluses would be, it would be unique, it's more comfortable, provides greater relaxation. Opportunities, it might be helpful for people with disabilities and injuries. It might create a whole new system of baths. And then some of the issues, how do we sanitize it? How do we make sure it's leak-proof? And how to market it? And then we did a little bit of a brainstorming of we could steam it clean. You could have a removable liner, how to market it on Home and Garden. So the goal, again, is what do we like about an idea? What opportunities does it provide? Providing ideas and feedback about concerns. Little comic there on the right-hand side, right? What can we look at? Providing a point on the kind of bread that we might want on a sandwich. So convergent thinking, we reviewed the ground rules. We reviewed highlighting, hits, and clustering. And we looked at one technique, point, which allows ideas or performance feedback to be given, developed, and anywhere there's a hiccup is to be able to move forward from it. Ground rules of convergent thinking again, apply affirmative judgment, be open to novelty, be deliberate, and stay the course. One last bit of information I just want to share with you. Oh, we have another poll. Caitlin, you want to do that one?
Definitely. I went ahead and opened up the poll, so feel free to look at the right side of your screen and answer the question there. Poll question number 4 is, do you see the application of point for providing feedback to team members? Options are yes, for sure, or no, our culture would not be open to providing feedback this way. So do you see the application of point for providing feedback to team members. Interesting. We only have a couple responses so far. Surprisingly, no's. I was expecting 100% yeses again, but still giving some time. So one last time reading it out. Do you see the application of point for providing feedback to team members? It looks like they're not ready at this time, but I do, Teresa.
Good. What we could do maybe when we have Q&A is that we can open it up to individuals to share why they think it would be a challenge and see if we can perhaps push them over the edge to try it. If not with a colleague, maybe just feedback for their child at home who's misbehaving. A final tip on creativity etiquette is that it is always, always considered improper to diverge and converge at the same time. The goal is to be explicit in understanding where you are and what you need, and then balancing between one or the other, but never the two at the same time. So, things that we wanted to cover in this webinar: understanding the ground rules of divergent and convergent thinking. We covered that. Use new tools to find possibility in face of challenge. We looked at brainstorming, force connections, and brainwriting. We employ tools that help us evaluate ideas. We looked at HIT, cluster, and restate, and point, that tool. And then we said that we would learn what HT, HM, so how to, how might, what might be all the ways, in what ways might stand for. So I think we covered our objectives there. A couple of resources for you. The International Center for Studies in Creativity is located in Buffalo, New York. Their website is there. Creativity Unbound, great little handbook just to be able to immediately jump into some tools and techniques and learn a little bit more about how to apply them. And a great book I find for team leaders in looking to be more positive, more open to creative and novel solutions in their problem solving is a book called Creative Leadership. And I give those names there of those authors. So we have some questions, but still we have, Caitlin, you want to jump in on this and then we can look for questions?
Definitely, that sounds great. Teresa, this was a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much for it.
Thank you for attending our webinar today. I hope you found it useful and beneficial to employ some tools and techniques that allow your team to be more effective and more efficient in the work that they're doing.
Excellent. Thank you so much again, Teresa, and thank you all for tuning in today. Have a wonderful rest of your afternoon. Hopefully we'll see you back on the 17th.
Thank you.